So it was the end of World War II. World War II was over. The peace treaty was signed. But yet in the South Pacific, there were still battles raging. There were people that didn't know the war was over. Specifically, some of the Japanese troops, even though they knew the war was over, wanted to continue fighting anyway. The bullets were just as real. The mortar shells exploded and they were just as deadly. Even though the war was over, battle still raged. And guys, what I want to tell you today is that's the position we find ourselves in today. God has won the battle. Jesus has won the battle. He defeated death at the cross. He defeated Satan at the cross. Yet the battle still rages. Yet we are still in a spiritual battle. So again, this is part 3 of the Invisible War, talking about spiritual warfare. And the title of this one is Get Geared Up. All right. So what have we done? Let's review. First of all, we said Satan and his host of fallen angels engage in warfare. Why? To discourage, deceive, divide, and destroy God's people and God's program. And then as believers, we're commanded to equip ourselves and prepare ourselves in the strength of the Lord. Hey, Justin, could you go to the next couple of slides? Maybe, yeah. And we're commanded to equip and prepare ourselves in the strength of the Lord and in His mighty power to stand firm against the enemy's schemes, to repel his multifaceted attacks, and to engage and defeat him in specific battles. So how do we do this? Well, our first steps, right? What has brought us to this point? Where have we come from in these first couple of sermons? Number 1, we became aware of the battle, that there is a spiritual battle that's going on. And then, so that's what the first 2 sermons kind of this series were, right? There really is a spiritual battle going on, and we described our enemy and who he is. We said, hey, we need to respect him, but we need not fear him because God has already won the battle. But today, we're going to start learning how to get geared up to prepare for the attack. So that's what today is about, all right? So, going to the next slide, Justin. So, therefore, put on the full armor of God. Let's go back to Ephesians and read our key text. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything to stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. So that's our key text that this whole series is centered around. The Greek verb here means to take immediate action. All right. This is not telling us that we're going to do something in the future. Right. This is telling us we're going to take action now. Therefore, put on the full armor of God. The Greek language is a little bit different than the English language, and the verb tenses are different. In this case, again, this verb tense is saying, hey, you need to take immediate action. This is something you need to do now. We're not telling you to do this at some point in the future. It's saying, hey, you need to do this now. Jesus is communicating to us that we need to do this now and continually. We need to pick up our armor and put it on. Stand firm means to hold the ground we already possess. We've come out of the world. We've been forgiven by God's grace. We're walking, we have spiritual gifts. We're walking with Christ. We're part of a body of believers. And now, the ground we have, that ground that I just described, we need to hold that ground. The bullets and the mortars are coming, believe me. You're going to hear things like this. You don't deserve God's forgiveness. God doesn't love you. Look what you did. Can you believe she said that about me? Why should I forgive her? Who does he think he is talking to me like that? What's wrong with that guy? How could God let this happen? You're going to hear these kind of things. And then before you know it, before we know it, we don't look too much different from the person that we were before we turned our life over to Christ. The way we used to treat people and the priorities we used to have. So the battle's going to happen, guys. And if you hadn't felt it yet, you will be. The day of evil it talks about in this verse It's talking about a specific day when a specific attack is going to happen. So what God is telling us, when we go back to that verse in Ephesians, and he's talking about a day of evil. He says, so when that day of evil comes, right? Therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when that day of evil happens, or when it occurs. He's talking about there's going to be a specific, the devil and Satan and his enemy, Satan and his demons will choose specific points. We talked about this a little bit, to attack us. He likes to find us when we're vulnerable. So we're talking about specific points of time. So when it says there, when that day of evil comes, we're talking about a specific point in time. And like soldiers preparing for attack, we must be ready because we don't know when it's going to happen. The enemy wants to get us when we're vulnerable. So when are we vulnerable? When we're tired? Maybe when we've had a little conflict with our wife or husband. Maybe when we've got some kind of financial crisis going on. Our truck dies. Whatever. Maybe it's when you're in the ICU like Kevin was yesterday. Or maybe it's when one of your kids is in the hospital and you're wondering why God let this happen. Maybe it's when you prayed and prayed for something but it never seems to happen. And then that little voice pops up and says, see, God doesn't care about you. He doesn't listen to your prayers. Or maybe you ask yourself, why am I living like this? Maybe you're single and you're living a pure life. You're trying to live a pure life before God, but you look around you and you see all these other folks that are single going out and having a good time. And you wonder, why are you struggling so hard and why are you trying so hard to live right when it seems like they're the ones out there having such a great time? Guys, these are the kind of attacks I'm talking about. So how do we repel these attacks? We put on the armor of God now and continually before the attack comes. I got to tell you, when, you guys know I was in the Army for 20 years. You train before you fight. You don't wait till the battle comes and then try to train and try to get geared up then. There's something you do in the Army or in any Marines or whatever. It's called a pre-combat inspection. And before a soldier leaves for combat, we go through a checklist. You got your ammo, you got your water, you got your MREs, you got this, you got the op order. You know what the operations order is. Do you know what the intent is of this mission? You got a map, you got a compass. Do you know what's going on? It's, are you prepared? We go through a checklist. Every single soldier goes through it before he goes out on a mission. Why? Because once the bullets start flying, it's too late to get prepared then. Right? It's too late. So that's what we're talking about. We have to be prepared before the battle actually starts happening. And I want y'all to understand, this is not, when we talk about putting on the armor of God, and this is a metaphor, all right? So we're about to get into this deep, all right? But this is a metaphor. It's not some physical, step-by-step mechanical thing. Well, if I do this, I do this, I do this, then I'll be ready. It's a metaphor. It's for us to understand how to become prepared spiritually. So let's start talking about, first of all, and here we go, the belt of truth. All right? That's the first piece of our armor. All right, so next slide, Justin. So I compare it to an LBE or an LCE, we call it in the Army or in the Marines, load-carrying equipment, load-bearing equipment. It looks like this. This would be our now-day equivalent of what a belt of truth was. Back in the Roman days, they had this belt, and to it they would attach their breastplate. And there would also be a place for their spear to hook onto it. And there's other things. Basically, the bottom line is all the other equipment rested on this belt, all right, at one point or another. Kind of the same thing in modern armies today. You would get something called an LBE, load-bearing equipment. Everything else just about goes on that thing. Your canteens, your poncho, your ammo, grenades, whatever you're carrying, just about goes on this belt. The only thing that probably doesn't is your Kevlar that's on your head and your M16 or whatever weapon you're carrying like that. And so the point is this. The point I want you to take from this is the belt of truth has to be there first, because everything else depends on it. Everything else builds upon that. And if that's not in place first, nothing's going to work. All right, so let's talk about what this belt of truth is. Now we're going to get down to specifics. What is the belt of truth? Anybody got any ideas? When we talk about the belt of truth, what is it we're talking about here?
The
The Word? Almost. Not exactly. All right, let's talk about what the Scripture actually says. And I had to go back to some of the original Greek translation to make sure I understood this correctly. Truth, as used in the Scripture here, means honesty and openness in all things with God and man. No deception, no hidden agenda. You don't play games. You're honest with yourself, you're honest with God, and you're honest with others. And you're open when the Spirit of God speaks to you. In contrast, the enemy is always lying and deceptive and wants you to be the same way. What's his number one tactic? Deception. What did he do to Eve in the Garden of Eden? He deceived her. And how did he do it? He made her question the accuracy of the truth she knew. Did God really say you can't eat of any tree in the garden? He made her question God's goodness. He twisted the truth and he made sin look appealing. What did he say? God knows that when you eat from this tree, your eyes will be opened and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. He twisted the truth. Yeah, their eyes would be open, but that wasn't a good thing, and he made sin look appealing. And he lied to her, he lied to Eve about the consequences of sin. He said, you won't die. Of course, God was talking about a spiritual death, a separation from God. He wasn't talking about a physical death. So Satan lied to her, deceived her. And that happens today. Guys, I got to tell you, I know people who are Christians who are deceived, honestly. I mean, I know people, unfortunately, I know some people who go to church and talk about what a great spirit-filled Christian they are, but they lie at the drop of a hat. It's nothing for them to just throw a lie down as if it's just second nature to them. They steal at the drop of a hat, and then they lie to cover that up. I mean, I know people like this. And it's sad. And it's sad. They are so deceived. It's unbelievable. And I got to tell you, listen, this has got to be one of the toughest things. To be able to be honest about yourself and do a self-assessment. We'll get to that. I'm getting ahead of myself. Do y'all want to see this in action? Let's look at TV. Let's look at the lies that are being peddled on TV, the deception that's being peddled on TV. The key to true happiness is having more and more money to buy more and more stuff. Every commercial that comes on, and you drive a cool car like this, and that blonde-headed chick that jumped in the car with that guy, the same thing's going to happen to you, right? Sarcasm and making fun of people it's just funny. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Everybody does it. I'll tell you what, the world is carried away with sarcasm. I don't know if y'all notice. It happens on sitcoms. It happens everywhere. This is not God's way, by the way. This is the world's way. Making fun of people to get a laugh. And look, I've done it. I do it. I'm guilty of it. Right? That is not godly behavior. That's not what God's called us to do. But we see it so much, we think it's normal. It's not. Sex before marriage is normal and it's expected. And in fact, it's better to live with somebody before you commit to a long-term relationship. Listen, guys, I heard a lady at work who goes to church telling somebody that the other day. Yeah, you want to live with that person first. I'm like, we got these cubes. I'm over here. I'm going, man, I want to jump out the cube and say, don't listen to her. But I probably wasn't the right time or the right place. But, this lady goes to church, And it's like, man, what the heck? And if you're not happy, maybe it's because you were really meant to be another gender. And you can just change that. That's what the world's telling people today. There's a doggone show on about, I forget the name of the show, but, I Am Jazz or something like that, right? About this poor kid that is totally confused. God created people, and he didn't mess up when he created them. But the world's got people so confused. Look at Bruce Jenner. Oh, my gosh. He was a guy, and he wants to be a girl. Now he's thinking about going back to be a guy again. What the heck? That is deception and lies from the devil, pure and straight up. Another thing that we see all the time in action on TV is you're the most important thing in your life. Focus on yourself. Make yourself happy. Do what's right for you. Right? That's the lies that the world peddles right there. You see it on TV every day. Another one, there are no moral absolutes. What's right for one person isn't necessarily what's right for all. How many times have we seen and heard that? Here's another one. The Bible was written centuries ago, so everything in it is not necessarily relevant today. Anybody believe that? It's a lie from the devil. Deception. Stand up for your rights no matter what. That's another one. What's behind most of these lies? Think about it. What's behind most of these lies? Who you are and how you're made doesn't measure up. You don't measure up in some kind of way. What you have doesn't measure up. And if you want to be a significant, important person, accepted, loved, and happy, then you need blank. And the world will gladly fill in the blank for you, and does all the time through mainstream media, through the TV, through every TV show you watch just about nowadays. It will fill that blank in for you. And before you know it, that thought pattern has become indoctrinated into your head so much that you are now deceived and you can't see the truth yourself. And that's what's happening in America, and it has been happening for a long time. We're buying it. We can go to church, say a few prayers, and we can even throw some money in the plate. But then we go home and we let that media infiltrate our thinking to the point that we're raising our kids to be just about the same as the world raises theirs. We're handling our money just about the same as the world handles their money. We're talking, we're acting, we're living, and are just about as honest as the rest of the world is. Why? Because we're deceived. Next slide. Satan's first attack on mankind was deception, which was followed by man's hiding, denial, and blame shifting. This has not changed, people. God asked Adam, why are you hiding? What does Adam do? He blames Eve. And so, well, this woman you gave me right here, man, it's her fault. What does Eve do? Well, this serpent you created, God. I don't know who created the serpent. I guess you did, God, but he's the one who deceived me. Really blaming God. And the belt of truth is about being honest and owning our own mistakes, faults, and shortcomings. That's what the belt of truth is about. I don't know about you, but facing the truth about myself can be really hard sometimes. I do the same thing sometimes. It's my wife's fault. My boss's fault. I don't know why my daughter did that. Whatever. And I do the same thing sometimes. We have to own and we have to be real about why we do things, why we're doing things, why some things are important to us. And if we can't do that, guess what? The rest of the armor is not going to work. This is what I want to tell y'all. We got to have the belt of truth because it supports everything else. And we can go on to the rest of the armor of God and we can talk about fighting spiritual battles, but you're not going to fight spiritual battle one unless you got the belt of truth on first. Psalms 139, 23 through 24 says, "Search me, God. Know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's anything offensive in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." David wrote this from the Old Testament. David. Y'all recall David. He had a rough time, honestly. You know, he was anointed king as a young kid. He defeated, we talked about this, he defeated Goliath. He went on to become hunted by Saul, King Saul. I mean, he was hunted down, and basically they were, you know, and finally he became Israel's king. And then after he became king for a while, next thing you know, what happens? Right? He sees a woman, beautiful woman, who is the wife of one of his commanders in his army, commits adultery with her, and then to hide, to cover up that, what does he do? He gets that guy killed. So David wrote this well after that. He wrote the Psalms after that. And so David knows a thing or two about being deceived. David was deceived. He experienced exactly what we're talking about. And so that's why David writes, and finally David came to grips with it. How did David come to grips with that, by the way? A man of God came to him and told him a story. And David said, well, that's horrible. He told him a story. Y'all remember that? And David said, well, that guy's horrible. He should be, you know, basically he should be shot, you know. And then the prophet looks at David and says, David, you're that man. David was deceived. Why? Because the devil's working in his life. Look at, David was justifying, the whole way. Do we do that? Is it hard for us to face the things we do and the motives we have behind things? You're doggone right it is. And it took a prophet of God telling David, you're that man. And then David did get things right with the Lord. He did. He moved on from there and he got things right. So I guess what I'm saying is, if we want to talk about being deceived, King David knew about being deceived. And then out of that experience, he wrote Psalm 139 again. So he knows what it means when he's saying, search me, God, know my heart. Test me. Know my anxious thoughts. Lord, see if there's any offensive way in me. He knows it. He knows that when we're deceived, we don't see it. That's the whole point. When you're deceived, you don't see it in yourself. And so we have to ask God, God, search me. Pull that thing out of my heart. If there's something that's taking root in my heart, Lord, pull it out. So again, the belt of truth is the first piece of armor. It has to be there first. It's about our relationship with God and total honesty with God and others. I've seen situations where folks were operating in the church, doing things for the wrong reasons, for the wrong motivation, and they were deceived. I've seen situations where pastors, music ministers, whatever. I mean, I knew at a point this music minister, man. I mean, he was a music minister, so he could be on stage. That's what he was about. I mean, he wanted to be a rock and roll dude, and that's why he was on stage leading worship. He wasn't on stage because God had called him to lead worship, and because his primary purpose was connecting people with God. And I knew this guy, and I was like, man, he was deceived. I'm telling you, there are good people who are in the church who are deceived. And that can be me. That can be you. It can be every single one of us, for different reasons or for whatever. And so today, here's what I want to ask us to do. I want to ask you, here at this invitation time, to pray in your heart. And if there is, let's use that psalm as a prayer. God, search me. If there's anything in me that's not right, that's not the way you want it to be, God, I pray that you just pull that out of my heart. That you show me that, because I don't want to be deceived. Why? Because there is a battle going on. And if we don't have the belt of truth around our waist, nothing else is going to work. Nothing else is going to be supported. We're not going to be able to fight these spiritual battles. So we first got to get open and honest with ourselves. If we got sin in our life and we're deceiving ourselves, and we're being the plastic Christian who comes to church and says, oh yeah, hey, how you doing? Hey, everything's great. Yeah, I'm doing great. Look, but yet over here, we're sinning. We're doing whatever. We're sleeping with this guy over here. We're sleeping with this gal over here out of marriage. Or whatever. I don't know. I'm just throwing something out there. But whatever the case may be, we better get that straight with God. All right? So this morning, let's ask God to search us. We're just going to have a little bit of time of prayer. And I want to, and please, guys, I'm just asking everybody does this. I'm doing it. Let's ask God to search our hearts and see if there's anything that's impure or not right, and that He would address it. He would identify it to us so we can fix it. All right. Okay. Finally, I want to say if there's anybody here who, and I know most everybody here, so I'm still going to express it anyway. If there's anybody here who does not have a relationship with the Lord, who has not turned their life over to Jesus Christ, who has not said, you know what, God, I want to get right with you, and I want to make my life right. I want to be forgiven of my sin, and I want to be restored into a right relationship with you, and I want to start living for you. If there's anybody that's not made that decision and wants to, be up here. All right? We'd be glad to pray for you. If there's anybody that hasn't been baptized, wants to be baptized, man, we'll gladly make that happen. We'll go out to the beach, have a baptism service like we did a few weeks ago. All right? If there's anybody here that wants to join a church that's not a member, that's open as well. So I'll be here up front afterwards and to talk to anybody that wants to talk about anything like that. All right? So God bless you guys. Have a good day in the Lord. And thank you for everything you guys are doing.